All right, welcome back. This is the Something Adventure podcast. I am Kent Lindstrom. I am your host. My guest today is Jenny Lefcourt. How are you doing?
I'm doing great.
Well, thank you so much for doing this.
Particularly great. Yeah, thanks for having me.
So Jenny's a venture capitalist at Freestyle, which I think it's safe to say is one of the most famous, most respected seed venture firms in Silicon Valley. Notably started as a founder, started several companies, one of which became wedding.com and was acquired.
Weddingchannel.com.
Weddingchannel.com.
Although we did own weddings.com. But anyway, the company's weddingchannel.com.
Back in the day when everybody, it was all about the URLs.
Oh, yeah. I paid good money for that URL.
Yeah, I found that.
Weddings.com. It was worth it.
Yeah. So you started your career kind of at the opposite end of venture capital, right? Like I worked at Deloitte when I started and didn't start a company until I'd been at Deloitte for like 7 years. You started at Arthur Andersen.
Yes, I did.
Like, how did
that happen?
Yeah. How does like the young Jenny Lefcourt, well, you went to Wharton for college, right?
Yes. So young Jenny Lefcourt forgot to think. And so just followed this path, right? So Here I am, I'm at Wharton, and Wharton says, okay, business undergrad business majors, you have to have a concentration. Pick a class that you do 4 extra classes in, that's your concentration. Okay, well, I come from a family of accountants. For some reason, I just get accounting. It makes sense to me. Yeah. Debits equal credits. I got it.
Yeah.
And so taking the path of least resistance which will be a theme for a bit until that changed. I decided, okay, I'll do my concentration in accounting. And then before you know it, everyone's knocking on your door, offering you great jobs and great pay. Yeah. And I want to live in New York City. Super easy. Never thought about it. Said yes. And then, and the night before I went, and I don't think I've ever shared this on a podcast, but the night before I went, my then boyfriend, now husband, I cried to and said, what am I doing? I know this is not what I want to do. And he's like, well, you're starting tomorrow. And I was like, I know that. And so I just went, and I sort of knew before I began, it wasn't where I was supposed to be, but I'm goal oriented. And so I took the exam and I passed the exam. And so to earn my letters, you had to work 2 years. So I worked 2 years to the day, literally the day. And then I was out of there.
0 years.
Yeah.
It is cool though, that you started. I mean, when you look back, I worked at Deloitte before. I mean, do you think that it's maybe not a bad thing that you started at a company? Like you didn't start out, wearing, a t-shirt and complaining about the beef jerky at the startup. You kind of went to a real thing, and you probably had to wear a suit or whatever.
Oh, I didn't just have to wear a suit. As a woman, we had to wear pantyhose and skirts of a certain length. And there were a bunch of women who were trying to rally or whatever, petition so that we could wear pantsuits. And during my time, it was denied. So I didn't just wear a suit. I had to wear a certain suit. I had to wear pantyhose. Didn't matter if it was 100 degrees on the subway getting to work. Yeah. So
by the way, that's funny. That is my exact story. Of course, it is not as bad wearing a suit and tie, but I had a visceral memory of in Chicago. I went to Northwestern, so I was in Chicago, wearing a suit and tie on that L train green limousine with the broken air conditioner when it's like 92 at 8 a.m. Ugh, brutal.
Oh, I don't know. It's probably just as bad, but I'm a pretty optimistic human being. And I want to tell you that there's some beauty or something I learned. I think there is, and that I learned that was everything I didn't want in my life. And it wasn't that I hated it, because I actually did it just fine. I got good marks. I did it. I didn't cry again. Right. I powered through, but I remember I was on the audit side, and I remember doing an audit and saying to my higher ups, hey, why don't we do it like this? I think it would be better. And they said, well, what did we do last year? And I said, well, we did it this other way, but I think this way could be smart because, and I said, no, we do it the way, you just do it the way we did last year. Yeah. I said, but what if my idea is a good idea? And they said, it doesn't matter. We can only get criticized for making mistakes if we do something different than was done the year before. And I said, okay, have you guys ever thought about just getting monkeys to do my job? And I had a good relationship with my boss, and he just laughed and he was
Yeah.
like, you'll get to think one day. And I was like, will I? And so I recognized at my time at Arthur Andersen that what I valued was being able to think.
Yeah.
And that is sort of stayed through, which is why when I came to the Valley, it really worked for me, because I actually like to use my brain, and I love learning from people, and I love best practices, and I love studying the past, but I also do like to think.
Yeah. So you piece out from Arthur Andersen, but you really just don't then go to like a startup. You go and travel for a while. Is that right?
Yeah, I took a year off to backpack around, having no idea what I wanted to do.
Yeah.
I mean, literally no idea. I didn't know anything about Silicon Valley entrepreneurship. It hadn't really crossed my radar. So I thought that I did not want business, and I took a year off, and I'd earned that money, and I knew exactly how much money I had, and I decided, well, that I was going to come back and figure it out versus figure it out while I was gone. And I had a wonderful year. And I ended up landing in Palo Alto, and I just went to the Stanford Career Center because I had access to it through my now husband, then boyfriend, and same guy.
Yeah.
And went to the Career Center and just would pull down binders, pre-internet world, pull
Wow,
down binder after binder
that's pretty old
to
school.
read job descriptions to see what sounded cool. And lo and behold, it was an entry-level marketing job at a pre-IPO software company. That sounded pretty cool.
Yeah. So geography is kind of destiny. Well, how do you end up in, so, I mean, that's not the typical, like, hey, I'm hanging out in Southeast Asia. Okay, now I'm in Palo Alto. Like, what was the?
Well, my husband was at law school at Stanford.
Oh,
and so he said, just come here and you can live with us, and then you'll figure it out. And I just assumed that my job would be in San Francisco, right? The city. I was like thinking, New York City, San Francisco City. Yeah. He said, you may be surprised. There's a lot happening here. There's this thing called Silicon Valley. And I was like, oh, interesting. Anyway, like I paid no mind to it. And then I sort of accidentally fell into it. And boy, did I fall. I very quickly fell in love with it.
Yeah. This is like back when the internet was cool.
Well, this is back pre-internet. This is back, I got to be at a software company where we literally are sitting there debating, is AOL the internet? Is the internet AOL? We all were getting, discs sent to us where we're confused. And I said, you know what, I'll go figure it out. And they said, awesome. And so I went from figuring it out to being head of the internet department, which we then set up shop in Soma in San Francisco. So it was that kind of world where if you were willing to think and work, they were willing to let put you to work. Yeah. And so I was there at the beginning, and my first product, I was a product manager. The company was called My Software Company, and we created software that enabled small businesses to create brochures and business cards and whatnot from their home and print them out. Yeah. So I created the product called My Internet Business Page. So it let people create websites without knowing what a server was. And this is before everyone had their products. We were sort of ahead of our time. Now then we were not ahead of our time, and the big boys played and we were out, but it was really cool letting these and seeing what would happen when these small businesses would create I'm talking about brochureware, but they could get it up on the internet because we would mask all the HTML. We would mask all the talk of servers and FTPs and all that stuff. They were just pressing buttons and putting up their stuff online.
Yeah. And this was a period, if I recall correctly, when it wasn't obvious that you like go to Stanford and then leave Stanford at all. But to go to a startup, you would, the common thing to do, I think, was you go work for an investment bank or McKinsey, Bain, one of 3 consulting firms.
Yeah, well, I remember I hadn't made a vow to myself that I was going to go do something I thought was really enjoyable, not what I thought I was supposed to do. Yeah. So I wasn't looking at the Bains. I wasn't looking at the banks. I was reading job descriptions, and I thought this job sounded really cool. And guess what? It was really cool. And it opened up my world to just being with really smart people and having ideas and creating. And it also opened up my world and kind of semi-obsession with Stanford, because most of the people I was working with had come from Stanford. Right. And so I really ended up wanting an MBA because I wanted to do something at Stanford more than, and so I didn't apply to other business schools. I
Wow.
was Stanford or bust, not because, just because I was trying to, I just was kind of amazed and still am by the institution and
Yeah.
wanted to participate in it while I could.
I mean, this really seems like when I started my career at Deloitte, I moved from Chicago to San Francisco, and doing starting companies and then eventually becoming a venture capitalist. But it came from being here. Right.
Yeah.
I wasn't trying to do anything. It's just like, well, of course, Deloitte in San Francisco does consulting for tech startups. And so you meet those guys, you're like, well, those guys seem to be having more fun than I am. They're certainly getting a lot richer in some case. I mean, a little selection bias, right? Because you don't do
Yeah.
Deloitte if you don't go to Deloitte if you're not doing pretty well. But I mean, it just seems like for your path, like it was the being here that got you to that first step, because you still haven't even started a company yet in this narrative, but you're getting pretty primed to do it.
I'm getting primed to realize that anything is possible,
Yeah.
right? I mean, if I learned anything at my software company, it was anything is possible. And and then I go to Stanford and I realize, wow, and anything is
Yeah.
possible. And now you're surrounded by a bunch of people of all types who are kind of drinking the same Kool-Aid a bit.
Yeah. And so how do you take this leap to, like, when you go, I'm doing it. Because it's really insane. Like, we forget, like, going out, quitting your job and just starting a company, like, it's insane. People do it and they're really successful, but it's nuts. And you did it.
Yeah, it's funny. It's, I guess, because I had followed, back to your question of, you must have gotten something good out of your time at Arthur Andersen. What I got out of it is safe is not good. I mean, for some, safe is good, right?
It's also not safe too.
Right. It's also not safe.
If you lose your job at
Exactly.
that company after 32 years, or I don't know, it goes out of business.
Well, and Arthur Andersen eventually did go
Right.
out of business, but also it just got me to say, well, what is safe? Like,
Yeah.
safe isn't living, safe
Right.
isn't interesting. And so it allowed me to put almost a big X through safe. Safe
Yeah.
was almost like not interesting to me. And I think it's because I had saved enough and had enough that I always had, am I allowed to curse on your podcast? Is
Yes.
that allowed?
Yes.
I always had the perfect amount of fuck you money. It was
Yeah.
so small. It was so small. If I told you
Right.
the amount, you'd be like, that is not fucking money, but it was enough to allow me to do what I want to do. And being that I had lived off of under $10,000 for a year,
Yeah.
I knew that I was going to be okay. So it always allowed me to do what I wanted to do versus go to a place of having to be safe. And so I'm at Stanford Business School, and for fun, I start working on a business plan with a woman I'd met at various events. It was clear we were both interested in the same thing, and we start working together. And by the time we worked on the business plan a lot, got a lot of feedback, I dealt with all the VCs, and we had funding from Kleiner Perkins at the end of our first year. And so we decided to drop out of business school to do it. It didn't even, everyone's like, wow, that must have been such a hard decision. And it wasn't for me
Yeah.
or her. And it sounds like it's so strange or unbelievable that it wasn't, but it was like, I came to Stanford for the doors that would open, right? And they just opened early. But it wasn't like I thought, well, if I graduate from Stanford and I have that degree, now I can be somebody. It was more sort of an escalation of the journey.
Yeah. And so now you actually have the experience, like you actually are an entrepreneur and build something. Like, how does your first one go?
Well, the first one it was wild. It was sort of, it was an interesting journey because we got deemed sort of something. I don't know if that makes sense. I'm about to not make sense, so ask questions. But somehow, because Kleiner Perkins was the shit, and we got money from them, and we dropped out of business school, the media fell in love with us,
Yeah.
and so we were kind of deemed to be something before we were anything.
Yeah.
And I would say, if anything was hard, it was that. The doing it was awesome. Hiring incredible people, building something, seeing it work, figuring shit out. That was awesome. But the sort of being crowned before we deserved to be crowned, I would say, was the hardest part of it all.
Yeah. Was the two women a thing? Like, not maybe in a good way, maybe in a bad way? Was that at the time a little more novel?
It's funny. I look back and I have the exact same question. I don't know, because at the time I wasn't aware of any of the data I now know. So I didn't know it was rare for women to raise venture capital. I didn't know that it was harder for women in the workplace. I had never heard about it, so I didn't know it. So we never felt anything was harder or easier. But now, knowing what I know, I can't help but wonder, was that sort of crowning a bit, being on Oprah and what, like, the crazy shit that went on. It's very much probably these two young women drop out of Stanford Business School to create this company, and that the media loved that.
Yeah, you don't think, I've had a lot of women on this podcast who are venture capitalists and entrepreneurs at different stages in Silicon Valley. And I'm fascinated by the women, not older, they're just venture capitalists like in the 90s.
Yeah.
Compared to now, when people are thinking about it, doing things, all raise, we can talk about that in a second. It isn't that there wasn't discrimination, that there wasn't, all these things weren't happening, but they were just sort of like not thinking, they're just very practical. They're like, well, I wore my hair a certain way and I kind of wore a baggy this, and I don't know, we just got on with it, which is a very different attitude, than you hear from people now. It's just, I don't know, different time.
It was a totally different time. And what's interesting is, because we didn't have that monkey on our back, I'll never forget. I mean, I see it perfectly going into Kleiner Perkins for the partner pitch, where we're going to pitch the full partnership. And man, I'd never seen a conference room so big.
It's like, it's a piece of theater. If anyone has seen it, they've got this thing that's such a big conference table that they have little amplifiers to get your voice across this thing that looks like a Viking, the hull of a Viking ship.
It was
it is
wild.
ridiculous.
And I was not prepared
Yeah.
for, I mean, we knew our shit into, we knew our business, but we go in there and they told us, I think an hour before, I know we said we wanted you next week, but we want you now, which we now know was because Benchmark was giving us service, but we didn't know the whole game very well. So we got the hour, we ran back, we put on our Ann Taylor suits, that were very suitish. And we go in there and it was huge, just like you described. And it's all men around the table. Of
course, yeah.
All men, which didn't even throw either of us, but it was so interesting because there we were pitching, and the questions we got, which were really smart questions. One of them, which was my favorite, was, why are you guys doing it the hard way? Do you not get it? The internet is going to get rid of the retailers. Don't work with the retailers. Go sell crystal in China out of your own warehouse and get 50% instead of 15%. Yeah. And we super confident in ourselves and what we knew, saying, you guys don't get it. We'll have 50% of nothing. Right. These brides aren't ready to register that way. They want to register with the brands they know and trust. And guess what? They're gift buyers who are going to go on the internet. They want to buy what the brides have registered for from the brands they know and trust. Yeah. So that may happen in a decade or two, but we're not here now. And so we used our women lens, if you will. We knew consumer behavior really well. And so we spoke with such conviction, and they agreed. Yeah. And they ended up funding us.
Nothing like product advice from a venture capitalist.
But it was a good, fair question, right? They knew the internet. They didn't know the customer. And when they saw that we knew the customer, they decided to back us. We were not the first people to have an aggregated gift registry idea.
Right. And so you take it as far as you can take it. Like, what is the success story, or the not so, how does this end up?
Yeah. So what happens is we basically get all the retailers, which was hard, really, really hard, except for one, Federated Department Stores, which own like Macy's and Bloomingdale. Yeah. So that 800-pound gorilla. Yeah. And amazing, the Federated Department Stores ends up partnering with weddingchannel.com. Now we're Dell and James, and we have everybody else. Yeah. And we also have a crazy amount of money. We've raised money. Money is being thrown at us, right? Because Kleiner Perkins is in. And so Amazon put in money. I mean, so we have a pile of money, and we have all the retailers save that one, which is a pretty important one. And then you have a competitor, weddingchannel.com, that has all this wedding content that the brides would come looking for. So they had easier bridal acquisition, right? And Federated. but they're missing all the other retailers and they're missing the cash. And the world kind of comes to a screeching halt. The dot-com craze has settled down and no one can get money. So we have half of the puzzle, they have half of the puzzle, and we end up doing a 50-50 merger with them.
That's amazing. And so what happens then? Does it go
takes
public?
off. It ends up, I end up getting it, feeling like it's now in a place of safety. So I'll give you my personal, and then I'll give you the company. And so it's in a very safe spot. It's probably at about 25 million in revenue. We like the pieces have come together. The two parts of the company have come together, working well together. And I'm pregnant and I'm exhausted. And I decide I need to breathe again. I'd been 24/7. And by the way, loving my 24/7. I indulged my career. And I want to breathe and kind of recenter myself before I begin this next phase in life. And my business partner, Jessica, had another reason why she too was ready to kind of move on. So we end up in a very amicable, wonderful way, getting off that train. Company continues to do really well and ends up selling to the Knot many years later. So positive acquisition, but does not go public.
So when you have this child, do you think in 17 or 18 years, they're going to go to a top school, like Stanford or Harvard, and that's going to happen during a global pandemic in which they spend their senior year at home? Is that what you were thinking at the time?
I knew that's exactly what was going to happen. Smart. I started storing up masks way back.
Super smart. How was that? Like, I don't have a child. I certainly don't have a teen child during a pandemic. How did you, how'd that go?
It was actually, once again, you're going to see my rose-colored glasses, but it was wonderful. It's like,
it's funny. A lot of families say that.
Yeah. So here we are. We have a kid who's about to go off to college. And then we have a 17-year-old girl, and I guess he was a 14-year-old boy at the time. And suddenly we're all stuck in the house together, and it was kind of family magic. And I'm sure the kids would they're not welcome on your podcast. They may have a different version of the story. But my husband and I and the kids, like, we were playing games. We were taking out games that we used to play back, a decade ago. And we were laughing, and we had family dinners night after night after night. And so while of course there was, hard and it was not fun, lockdown wasn't great, all that stuff, it really was a magical time in the family. And so then, as our son gets to go off and have his, and by the way, the fun thing about the son who is now in college, he starts working for a nonprofit doing data visualization of COVID. So he was like our COVID guru, but then he also starts working for a startup, and then he ends up getting full-time at the startup and not doing the nonprofit. And he was constantly coming into me and asking me questions, and he and I would whiteboard his UI UX, and I'd give him just a little bit of wisdom and send him on his way. And so he left, he took off. Once again, he's not welcome on your podcast to give another version of this story, but he went off to college understanding, like, I think he knew before, but like, wow, mom knows a lot. Because I know very little about a lot.
Oh, you work at a startup. You're going to find this funny.
Well,
I actually know
VC,
something about that. I actually, your friend's parents might not, but this one does.
As a VC, I mean, you know the job. We know a little about a lot. Like the depth, I'm not going to be your UI UX master, but I can point you in the right direction on a number of
And by the way, most
things.
VCs wouldn't put it that way. They'd say they know a lot about a lot.
I know they would.
So back in the timeline, you're still starting companies. You're not yet a venture capitalist. You've started a family. How do you get back? Having a family takes some time, as I understand it. So how do you get back into the?
So I actually believe in the moment that I want to be a stay-at-home mom. And so I take my 3 months, I recenter myself. I have this child who I want so very much. And I am with him full-time, no help, a husband who works a lot for about 6 months, and realize, okay, this is not happy. I love him. But I miss my brain. I miss some confidence. I felt like I wasn't productive. So I end up getting help and saying, okay, I'll be a lady who lunches, right? I'll have the reprieve, and then I can show up fully for him and enjoy my time with him. And this is all very personal. I believe everyone has to find their own happy. So there's zero judgment here. But for me, that made me feel worse about myself. I felt just like, okay, now I even have free time to like shop and exercise and lunch but no, that's less of what I want. And so I end up consulting for the guy who had the founder of my software company. He was the chairman of the board, who I was very close with. And I started doing sales consulting. That was great. Really got my brain in motion, it had a good time, but also was kind of working part-time. Have baby number 2, which is my daughter.
Yep.
And about 6 months later, and sort of getting into this rhythm of not knowing and feeling really comfortable with that. Like, I'll know when it's time to know. And then lo and behold, someone who is an investor and on our board at Della & James, the company that became weddingchannel.com, says there's this company you have to meet. And it ends up, it wasn't quite a company yet. It was called Bella Pictures. And it was the first national, or wanted to be the first national wedding photography company.
Mm-hmm.
And I really liked the founders and I really liked the idea and I loved the business model. So I end up saying, okay, I will do this. I'll join as a founder, but I have to protect my space. Like, I need to work part-time. And I'm doing air quotes, which no one can
Yeah, I was
see
gonna say,
because
there's
it's
no
a
way,
podcast.
there's no way that worked, right? Like,
It
that's
doesn't
not what
work. You
happened.
get all the responsibility. And,
Yeah.
but I mentally felt okay about taking half the salary and half the equity because it relieved me of the burden I put on myself, which
Yeah.
if I could go back in time, that was silly because I was contributing full time. I was just trying to do it. I didn't have the concept of flexibility at that time. So anyway, I bought myself flexibility, bought it in my head.
Yeah.
And so I did that for a really long time and I thoroughly enjoyed it. And I mean, we were sort of a rocket ship for a long time until 2008 came and we flatlined, and the rocket ship was no longer up and to the right.
Yeah.
And so it was a hard couple of years.
So your superpower is starting companies right before the world ends.
Yeah, basically. Yeah. And then finding capital when capital could not be found. I literally had to say, I have to give up my job here at Bella Pictures. Someone else has to take it over because I was just living on Sand Hill Road, just raising capital in 2008 when the world was absolutely frozen. And every day our metrics were crumbling just a little bit. We were still okay. But like everything that was moving up and to the right was just showing signs of breaking.
Yeah. So when do you, that is funny. It's funny the number of times, I guess I've been through 2 or 3, like the internet's over kind of thing,
Yeah.
which, we'll see. And, Miami's the next big thing. So then is this where the venture capital career begins, or where does that come from?
Yeah, no. So it doesn't begin. So I end up leaving Bella Pictures for a family reason. My mom had gotten super sick, and then we ended up selling it to a company called CPI. But anyway, which is a public company, and I am feeling once again really, really fried. And there's a theme here, which is that I'm kind of intense, but I don't know it yet, right? And so when I'm a little all in, which is why I think I do well as a venture capitalist, because the portfolio approach really works for me personally. And so I end up almost doing something at the time I called a fake job, which was that I was advising consulting and angel investing. So I got myself a little office about 2 miles away and I worked when I wanted and did when I didn't, but I was feeling really helpful and really still keeping my toe in the water, but knew that I was not ready to jump back in. And so I did that for a number of years and the kids were young and once again, my husband works a lot. And so it was a really nice time for me to be mostly home. And I put my work around my home to sort of get almost recentered again. I know it sounds like a woo-woo word, but whatever, that's what I needed. And then there got to be a time where I realized, well, I was keeping my career in a box a bit for the kids, but the kids had kind of gotten to that place where I was holding myself more back than I needed to. And so I decided to go back in. And so I started a third company and I joined a woman I'd been consulting with. I brought her in on a consulting project. I thought we worked really well together. We raised $2 million. We kick off and I realized, no, it's not right. So really early called it and it was cool. Wasn't working for her either. we separated, and I knock on the door of Josh and Dave at Freestyle because we had pitched them to say, hey, just lifting my head up, not sure what I want to do. And so no agenda. And so I end up getting coffee with Josh. And I said, hey, just once again, no agenda. I'm just picking my head up. And he said, well, pick your head up. Why don't you come on over and be with us? And he said, part-time. You got nothing to lose, right? You can go look for whatever, you can pick your head up and look at other stuff, see if you like it. We'll see if we like you, and we'll go from there. So he made a good point. It's not like it wasn't going to keep me from anything. So I worked part-time for them a couple of days a week for about a month. And then they offered me full-time, and I took it. And then and they said, but we're not going to make you a partner. Partner is a very powerful word to us, or we're not going to make you a partner now. It's a very powerful word to us because we've been partners for 20 years. And so I know some other firms throw it around, and we know have the experience and you're of the age that you're not deserving of it. But at the same time, that's too important of a word for us. And I said, I don't give a shit.
Right.
And I remember Dave saying, you don't? I was like, no. I was like, are you going to let me lead investments? Yeah. Is my voice going to be heard at the table? Yeah. Okay. And we've agreed on salary and carry. So yeah, I don't care. And he said, well, what do we call you? And I said, well, you can't call me an associate.
No.
And I said, why don't we just call me an investor? Don't call me anything. I don't care. And so it was funny that, so anyway, so I don't know what I was without title, or I think I put investor on for a little bit. And then they invited me to be a partner in Fund 3. And then an equal partner in Fund 4, and then the story carries on. Yeah.
And so how does this work? So Josh Felser and Dave Samuel have worked together for a long time. They started a company in the 90s and like sell it at I think the perfect minute. I can't remember, like
perfect minute.
It's ridiculous. And then they do another company. So these two guys have worked together for a while, been through it. They're kind of personality. They have like personalities, like Josh and Dave. They're kind of particular personalities.
Yes.
How does this? And you just join them? Like that seems like that shouldn't work.
Yeah, it's funny because it does seem that way. And there was a woman who was leaving. The reason they even asked me to come and work part-time is there was another woman who was working with them. And she was thinking about moving on. She was very interested in crypto, smart woman.
Wow.
And so I asked her when she was leaving, I said, so I'm going to work with them. And do you have any advice as I do? And she said, well, just be prepared. It's like, they're awesome people. Like she said wonderful things about them, but she said, it's the Josh and Dave show.
Right.
And you have to be okay with that. And I said, yeah, I don't care. I'm happy to be the Josh and Dave show, but it really wasn't. So I sort of went in knowing that they were who they were. And I joined them, and I saw each one. I knew that they brought different things to the table, and I go to them with different sort of things I was trying to figure out. I'm very goal oriented, so I kind of knew I wanted to be good at it. And so I sort of go to each, almost like go to mom or dad, knowing, who had it to give. And they were wonderful, absolutely wonderful. So they are them, but there was room for me and my voice at the table.
Yeah. So I don't want to let this slip by, which is that Dave and Josh founded several companies. You founded several companies, and people all over the world listen to this podcast. And I think entrepreneurs and people who are just interested in Silicon Valley for whatever reason think that there's many, many more venture capitalists that are founders than I think is actually true. And there's like a couple of things that go on. It's not that, first of all, you can make anything work in venture capital, you be journalists, whatever. But there's these sort of like little tricks that aren't really lies, but like, well, I worked at Google, and Google is a successful startup, but you didn't really start Google, right? Or well, I started a venture firm, like that's my startup. And the new one's kind of like I was an operator, which means, well, either means you answered the telephone in the 1950s, or it means that you had a job. But people who really started a company, like went out, raised capital, ruined their health, failed, succeeded, it's a little bit unique. It's not unheard of. Andreessen Horowitz, of course, I mean, it happens, but it's kind of unique to freestyle.
It is unique to freestyle. And I think that it's it's almost like it's invaluable, but not, it can't be seen, I think, until you're on the other side. And I think the combination of two things is the important part. Being a founder and helping, being a part of a founder's journey at seed, to me, is critical, because I don't know that you have to be a founder to help scale. In fact, I would argue an operator would probably be better than me at Series B, right? I haven't
For
scaled a
sure.
company from 25. I've taken companies from 0 to 25 million, but I've never taken it to 100 million to a billion. So I think you have to think about the stage. And then the second part is, it's been kind of in vogue in the past few years to go founder to VC. But are you a founder that can let go of the wheel, right? And not want to drive it, because you have to not be controlling, right?
Right.
And I get in the back, right? I don't want to touch the, and by the way, I am a VC because I don't want to hold the wheel. I find that I'm done with that phase. It's tiring. I like the portfolio approach. And so I think the combination of serial founders, but also proven that we're good at being the man or the woman behind the man or the woman.
Right.
And so I think some not, and a lot of founders have discovered about themselves, they become VCs and then they realize, I can't do it because I can't control, I'm just helping. It ultimately does not bring them happiness. So I think it's the combo that's killer.
Yeah. And no matter what anybody says, having been a founder, it seems to me the few VCs who are founders, they never complain about the job.
Never,
Like they never
never.
complain about being a
Ah,
VC in the way some people are like, well, I don't get paid that much and I have to worry about 30 companies. Like you never hear that from a founder turned VC.
you can't complain. I mean, and I'll say to my founders, so sometimes my founders are sweet, we start our calls, they say, well, how are you doing? And I said, oh, it's been an intense week. Oh, but let me be clear, nothing that compares to
Yep.
any week you've ever had. Like, I have never for a moment forgotten how much harder the founder job is than the
Yep.
VC job. I don't like, and when you hear VCs talk about it, it's
Just
comical to me.
cringe. It's
It's
cringe.
comical. It's like you have no idea. And that, I think, especially, it's not the amount of work, which it is a lot of work as a founder, but that heaviness of feeling like the weight of the world is on you. You have hired 100 people who have chosen to follow you, right? Take their
Yeah.
jobs with you and build what you are telling them exists. And that responsibility of knowing, and yeah, it's a lot. It's a
Yeah.
lot, especially when things go up and down and all around. It's a wild ride.
Yeah. Yeah. Jim Scheinman said it to me before I started being a venture capitalist and was still an entrepreneur. He's like, at the end of the day, when you become a venture capitalist, it's really not your company and you advise and you help and
Yeah.
all that. But at the end of the day, you go home. You don't live with the CTOs quitting and Susie got harassed by, all the
Yeah,
stuff you deal with every day. You also don't really deserve the credit when the company, goes
that's
public
right.
on the NASDAQ. But in terms of sort of your mental health, it's a different thing.
It's very different. I was told that the highs would not be as high,
Yep.
but the lows would not be as low. And what I have experienced is the lows are definitely not as low,
Yeah.
like orders of magnitude. Highs are really high for me.
Yeah.
And it's not because I take credit. I don't take credit at all.
Yeah.
It's more that it may be the mother in me, but like the idea that I believed in somebody and something and helped them in some way,
Yeah.
not credit, but that I was involved. And then you see them take off and go further than I personally ever went as a founder, is really fucking rewarding. Like, kind of blows
Yeah.
my mind. And so I don't take credit, but it's very high for me.
Yeah. Well, and so it's a pretty good job.
It's a
So
great job.
really, freestyle. Now that you know what Jenny does, they're really successful. They invest in things like Airtable and Intercom and Patreon and Better Up, like quite a gallery of unicorns and beyond unicorns. But somewhere along the line, you decide to go back. You're part of, or founder, I think, of All Raise, which is the group, Trey Vassallo, Aileen Lee, like a bunch of people. When do you decide to do that? Like go back and, hey, make sure women are supported in this world?
Yeah, it was an opportunity that kind of was presented to me, in that Aileen Lee sent an email to maybe 20 of us. And when I say us, women venture capitalists who, truly write checks, sit on boards, have power out of firms.
And Aileen was a
And
partner, or she was at Kleiner Perkins and then has started her own firm, Cowboy.
yeah, very
Quite
successful
successful, yes.
VC, Aileen
Yes.
Lee. And she says, hey, and we had just had the Justin callback summer where there was just some signs of these things that we thought weren't in our industry,
Yep.
were in our industry, of men
Yeah.
abusing power. And she basically wrote, it feels like a window of opportunity and we can do something.
Yep.
She didn't say what, and we all got together and we didn't know what. And we sat around the table and we talked about, do we help the women who have, sort of suffered, if that's the right word, or, have not been treated fairly. And we all came out saying, you know what, let's do something positive. Let's just be the positivity and be a part of the change that we want for our industry. And so we started coming up with ideas of what could help the industry get more diverse, right? Both on the funder side and the founder side. We brainstorm ideas. There was no talk of a name of the group. There was no talk of being a nonprofit, right? It was just for in our weekends and in our spare time, doing things that could positively impact the industry. So Jess Lee is at Sequoia, we did something called Female Founder Office Hours. And Sequoia gave us the space, and Jess Lee and I both had been founders, and we educated a group of women on trying to demystify the funding process. Then Jess took off and sort of productized that and made it so it still lives today. And I kicked off something that's called Founders for Change, which was the founders sort of announcing to the world, hey, we care about diversity too. And if and when we have choices in our capital, we will choose from firm, or part of our decision will be that the firms are diversified. So it was worded better than that, excuse that choppy way of it coming out. But there were a lot of founders who truly felt that way. And they knew that they needed diversity on their cap table so that they could have diversity at their organization, so that they could have a very healthy, vibrant culture, not toxic, but also it would help with recruiting, right? Rather than only fishing from a white man pond, you could have people of color, you could have women. And so having the founders and understanding their voices and their desires and us organizing them. And so then someone came to us and basically said, hey, you guys should be a nonprofit. You should have a name and you should hire people and you should let these things that you're just doing, like put a wrapper on it and let it live and really escalate it. And so that's what we did. But we did never, ever. I mean, it was probably a solid 6 months of just working before that ever occurred to us.
Yeah. Yeah. Shortly after that summer was when I started this podcast, and I realized that when I talked to people, at the time, the venture podcasts were terrible and they're just boring. But when I talked to people, like women would be like, well, I had this meeting that was in, they always get rescheduled to drinks. And like, I'm like, really? Like this goes on? And I must have, and still do, like 20 podcasts of women going, oh, I'll come on and I'll tell you a story. Because if you're a white guy and you don't really harass anybody, you don't get harassed, you don't not think it doesn't happen. You just don't, it's just not in your head until someone sits down and goes, no, here's what happens every day. It goes like this. And that opened my eyes a bit.
Well, it's interesting that you say that, because as a woman, I hadn't experienced it either, and I didn't really believe it. And so, and I don't say no one told me those stories and I didn't believe them, but it wasn't until I became a venture capitalist. And when I was advising women, helping them get funding, they would say to me, Jenny, you don't get it. It's so hard being a woman raised funding. And I said, no, it's not. These are capitalists. They don't care if you're like purple. They don't care what gender you are. They want you to make money. So if you present them with the opportunity to make money, they don't care that you're a woman. Get over that. And I really believe that. And I didn't know anything about I had never been harassed and so, I mean, I can look back now and be like, oh, that comment wouldn't fly today, but I never felt that that my voice wasn't heard. And I think I had my head buried in the sand.
Mhm.
And I think I'm goal oriented. And so I just got my job done, and I got married before I really had entered. So when I was fundraising, I was married. And so that probably helped too.
Yep.
So I'm sort of like you in that I didn't know until I saw the data and then said something isn't right. And then I've heard the stories and definitely know it's not right. And now I'm able to see more
Yeah.
than I was.
I mean, I think the sad thing I found early on was I could just any woman on the podcast, like I knew 100% I could ask for this. Do you have a story? And there was a story.
Right.
I rarely heard what you said, which is like, nah,
I
didn't happen
know.
as much.
Yeah.
So I have a couple final things I want to ask you about. So your firm's mega successful. There's 3 partners, and one of your partners, Josh Felser, famously turns to he leaves. He
Yeah.
goes to focus on climate. 9 times out of 10, when I hear that at a venture firm, oh boy, one of the partners, it's over. Like they're gonna run it out, and this guy's gonna leave, and that guy's gonna leave. You guys didn't do that. You managed to pull that off, and you now have a successful partnership, you and Dave.
Yeah.
How did you do that? That's not that common.
It didn't feel, it's sort of like back to like my past, you'll see the same, it didn't feel that hard. We had to think long and hard about what do we each want, what brings us each joy. And it was during COVID, which my partner Dave would call the great pause.
Yeah.
And it really was the great pause where we all got to think about, where do we get our joy? Where is our energy depleted? What makes us happy? And Dave and I work really well together, and we both still wanted to be great venture capitalists. And we knew that we could do that together. And so, we thought long and hard, and we worked with someone who was sort of coaching all of us about these things. And so, once again, it wasn't a hard decision, and it hasn't been a challenging thing. Now, the market has been different. The market is challenging, but my partnership is not challenging. Yeah.
Well, let me ask you about that. So one of the things that's happened, so let's see, 2 years ago, the thing you're supposed to say is like, oh, there's a million VC firms. There's too many of them. The new thing is, and this is true, that huge firms, like big late stage venture capital firms, are announcing these things that are like $600 million seed funds.
Yes.
Now, I mean, seed, and what do you make of this? Like, what's going on? What is a $600 million seed fund? I don't understand.
I don't know what that is, and I can't fathom the product that they can put out to these founders, right? And so at scale, I always understood it, but how we work with our founders, and we're in, day out, and we're figuring it out alongside of them, providing our network, providing our frameworks, providing our therapy. And I'm curious to see, like, how does that work when a when a firm has a $600 million seed fund and they put $3 million into a company? How do they show up for that company? And, I will tell you, and I'm sure some will be good about it. I don't know, but going back to my second startup, we were the rocket ship, and we had lots of choices on whose money we were going to take. And we once made a very bad choice. And I will tell you that our VCs told us that Foundation Capital, amazing venture capitalist, Paul Holland was our partner. He had been a founder. He got it through and through. And he had recommended that we not take, it was TPG's money. Mm-hmm. And TPG was pretending to be a venture capitalist for a moment, but they really weren't venture capitalists. They were growth. And we got wooed by all their connections and the Rolodex, and they knew Marriott and they knew this and that. So we said, Foundation, we appreciate you, but we really want to take the money from TPG and not the others. And they let us. And then we hit hard times, not right away, but soon after. And the way the TPG would show up was actually harmful for us versus helpful. And literally there was, I'll leave the name out, but the man on our board, when we're hitting hard times, and we're hitting hard times because it's 2008, right? And like the world is crumbling and people don't have the same money and whatnot. Not to say we don't have any part in it, but I'm just saying it's a hard time for all. And he tells us at the board meeting, you know what, you guys need to cut burn and increase revenue.
Wow.
And it was like, Wow. Thanks
Pretty,
for
pretty
that
insightful.
value add. Where
Yeah.
Paul Holland was in with us and he was figuring it out with us and he was asking us our thinking and challenging. Like he understood it and he
Yeah.
was so helpful. And that kind of product wasn't helpful. So how does this play out? I
Yeah.
have no idea. I'm not worried about the freestyles of the world or the venture capitalists of the world, but I am a little worried about the founders.
Yeah.
Because for some, I just don't know to get too much capital too early, or the capital and you're not really aligned, or you don't
Right.
matter to your firm
Yeah.
too early seems scary to me, but
Well, yeah, it's
only
weird.
time will tell.
Yeah, and
Excuse me.
it's weird to have capital that sort of doesn't matter. Like when we invest in something, we like it's okay, boy, this one better work, or we're never going to raise another fund. Like we got to, we have to.
Yeah,
If you're investing like I don't give a shit capital, but your lights, like you're a famous firm and your name means something when you invest in a Series A, like
yeah.
really means something. But you've kind of said we're doing a seed fund, but we're going to make. I guess you've got to make like 200 investments. It's clearly not what you do. You're just doing it because you can.
It's an optionality.
It's
They're smart to do it. I think those big firms are really
right.
smart. It makes sense for them.
Right. I'm just saying, if you're the founder
Yeah.
who's like got that I don't care money, I don't know.
Yeah,
Like
I know.
it's too much money, and you didn't really maybe prove anything because you didn't convince Freestyle. You didn't
Yeah.
get your act together to the point where Freestyle. So I don't know.
I don't know. I think only time will tell. And I think that some will come out fine and maybe they didn't
Yeah.
need, I don't know. Only time will tell is all I can
Yeah.
say.
You're not giving up.
Oh, I'm so not
You're-
giving up.
you're-
I am, I would say I'm super motivated and it is an honor. It's going to sound cheesy, but it's an honor to work with the founders we get to work with. And I'm not usually, we'll see what we'll talk in a year, but I'm not usually going up against the big firms. But we'll see.
Yeah, we don't either. It's funny. We talk to these things. We're like, we're going to invest in the big firms. Oh, we want to meet these guys early. And then they go meet them like, oh, it's too early for us.
Yeah.
So we're like, we knew that, but thanks for taking the meeting. It does sound cheesy, but it's true. So, I mean, thanks so much for doing this. What do you like as you look forward? Like, what do you've got not a new firm, but like a newly configured firm. And, the world is what it is. Like, what are you looking forward to? Like, what's animating you now?
First of all, we're not new. Dave and I have been working together, just Dave and I, for a while. So it doesn't feel new. And, we're raising, or I don't even know if I'm allowed to talk about, but our next fund is we're purposely not going bigger just because we can.
Yeah.
So we're kind of keeping to what we do, but understanding that the game has changed. And so I'm really looking forward to more of the same, but also just beginning to fall down the rabbit hole related to Web3, but I'm still kind of sticking to my knitting. And so I'm not really investing a lot there yet, but I'm enjoying getting educated about it. And I'm really into the future of work. I'm really into sort of elder tech or elder care, because I think that's interesting. I love no code, low code. So there, our hypothesis is we don't have a hypothesis, right? We let founders come to us and educate us, and then we get behind them. But there's still so much that I'm excited about. And it just feels a little bit easier with all the tools that are out there and all the education that's out there to figure out really early if there's something interesting happening.
Yeah. Well, how do people follow you? Like, do they go on Twitter? Or is it, what's the best way for people to?
I know. I back to like the efficient, goal-oriented person. I don't spend as much time on Twitter as I feel like I'm supposed to as a venture capitalist, but I am at Jenny Lefcourt on Twitter, and I sometimes tweet.
Yeah. By the way, there's plenty of venture capitalists taking up the slack for you. Like, you're fine.
And people reach out on the website. It says how to reach out to us, and people seem to make their way in, and we welcome it all.
All right. Well, thanks so much. This has been the Something Venture podcast. Jenny Lefcourt, my guest. Talk to you next time.
Thanks for having me.